July 9th that there are some label deprecations on the C advisor metrics. And so they were deprecated. We're shipping duplicate sets of labels. You can watch, I guess, the recording if you want to see that whole discussion. But basically, we asked SIG Node, will you give us your blessing so we can remove the duplicate labels, the old names that don't follow the instrumentation guidelines for the 1.16 release? So we're back asking for an answer.
Yes, thank you for follow-up. And last week at the SIG Node, we talked about this one, and we think about, we do agree, SIG Node as the community for the open source project, we don't have any reason to block that one, but because many people in a SIG Node actually also represent Kubernetes production, in their real production. So each one of them and need to go back to figure out there's any regression for their production. So far we haven't received, at least I know the Derek is not, couldn't join today's meeting, so I haven't heard from the OpenShift yet. And from Google side, we also have some follow-up, but we haven't figured out the final answer yet. So unfortunately, we cannot give you the final decision here. But from the open source perspective, actually, that's not our concern.
Okay, what I will probably do is I will put up a PR and then I think that Frederick has been also mentioning this in multiple different community meetings. So I think that we've shopped it around as best we can. And so if anybody comes up with a major objection, they can do so at that point.
That's a good plan. Cool.
Okay, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's move to the next one. And let's talk, come back, I think I see the Eselin reply my request. And Eselin, are you here? So maybe we can move to talk about the fallback image. Yeah.
Yes, so for context, I had proposed that the container spec be extended with a API key, which would allow to bring up a list of alternative registries upon which an image could be hosted and eventually pulled if kubelet cannot pull from a registry defined in the image key, for example, because the container registry might be down. Dawn, you have posted a comment on my GitHub issue regarding that a container runtime should be able to do this already. So if you could explain that more.
So I point to you, like for example, I hope the Maranov is here to talk about CRAIL, but at least from Containerd, you are here, right? So
yeah.
Do you want to go first? Then I can talk about Containerd.
Sure. So in CRAIL, we added support for repository mirroring. So for example, you have two different registries, a.io, Acme, your image. You can set up a rule saying, okay, my backup is b.io/foo.bar for that repository. So if an image fails to be pulled from the first location, it will try another location. And that's just an example. You can have various different mirror setup for your repository. So this is one step further from an entire registry mirroring. You can just pick and choose repositories that you care about. And we have like regular expression prefixes to match the image. So that way you have backup for your images. However, one thing to point out here is being careful about making sure that you're pulling the same image. And if you're pulling by tag, then you cannot be sure that it's the same image. The only way to ensure that is if you pull by SHA. So you can actually cryptographically verify that your contents haven't changed. So we allow you to limit such mirroring to only pulling by SHA in CRAIL.
So Containerd is have the way to make the Docker, you can configure of the register mirroring. And then if the one fail, and then you can switch to the secondary and pull the image. So I think I provide there. And there's also have an example and a link to an example how you configure that. Yeah. So I'm not sure this will satisfy you because from your doc, and it sounds like you want more. So that's why I want to bring you to the SIG Node. We can discuss more.
Absolutely. So what I had intended from the CAP was to resolve an issue we had at pusher.com, where our CI pipeline had essentially kind of blown up because a registry was down. I understand that container runtime can resolve this, but I had also noticed that some people like the idea of putting this into the spec of a deployment. So I think the only question right now that I have is this at all interesting on that level, or should this just stay in like a systemd unit that sets up the container runtime?
What would the advantages be of putting it in the spec? This seems like a problem that you would want your cluster operator to solve rather than your application developer.
Yeah, absolutely. That proposal had originally been essentially made by me because I did not know that container runtimes could do that at the time. So if everybody is just happy with that, container runtimes do it, then I'm happy to close this.
So I have one question. I didn't hear very clearly. CRI, is the CRI need to configure the entire of the CRI, right? Point to the different registry. So all it is, there's the way you could configure based on the image.
At the image level, no. This is at the repository level, not at the image level. And I think we still have an issue of authentication, of providing authentication to CRI-O. So like if we make this something more first class in the kubelet, then like runtimes don't have to worry about authentication. Like kubelet can potentially give us authentication for the mirror we are trying to pull from.
Okay.
So there might be advantages in like figuring out a design where kubelet could be more involved in mirroring.
Okay.
Yeah, we also had a request for doing mirroring across all registries, so that so you only had to define one mirror if there was a failure with any one of a plurality of registries that you might be using for pods.
Yeah, I remember I saw that request. So when I originally saw your proposal, I saw that it is the image-based or container-based, but it looks like it is our today's container runtime already address all your concern. So I think there's no need because this is proper those things into the container spec. And the pod level API, actually there's the impact a lot of the complexity there, and the make of management is much harder. And so it looks like right now we don't have the real use cases to propagate this to the container spec level.
Okay.
Okay, so do you mind to close and update that issue you file and give update with our current discussing and the conclusion? And
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for the issue, and thank you to attend the SIG Node for the discussing.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's move to the next in our agenda. So next one, Vinay, do you want to update, follow up last week? The vertical scaling.
Yeah, I think to summarize, last week we discussed two things. One is the potentially moving the container status resources allocated into the spec portion so that we have a way to reliably recover from any restarts. The other option to that was to node locally store this information, like what container has what requests allocated, and when an update request comes in, after we complete the update, then we update it. So at any given time, we read it, just like today when kubelet restarts, it discovers the current pods that are there, and it sees what the API server says the pods that should be, and then drives towards the desired state. We're going to drive towards the desired resources state as well. So there are two ways to do that. The second part of it was to see if we can keep the pod condition, which I'm still favoring, give it a little bit more thought on that. And I see that giving this, it's generated. I think there was some questions about this is keeping state. It's not keeping state as far as I can tell, unless I missed something. It can be generated if kubelet restarts. It can be generated. It's just an observation made based on the current. Once we get the reliably get the requests, we can see, okay, the requests match the desired. We're good. Everything is fine, or it does not. Can we fit? If we cannot fit, we fail pod node resources. Or if we can, then we work towards it and set the state as pending, in progress. So I don't know if Yuju and David had a chance to, and Derek as well, had a chance to look at, I think the plan was to review the KEP over the last week and then see if we can drive towards a closure on this. So I just wanted to bring this up. That's a summary. So want to find out where we are.
David is here.
Mm-hmm.
David, I think you had a few questions. I've responded to them. Just wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about some of the points you made. It seems odd to me to have a, sorry, I'm paging this back in. The pod condition such that if it's entirely reconstructible from the state of Kubernetes objects, it seems in some ways redundant then.
Well, it is not redundant in the sense that once it reconstructs it, kubelet knows whether it's possible to resize or if it cannot because of capacity. And that information is critical for the initiating actor like VPA. For example, let's say you have one single pod on a node, just a simple example, and the node has 4 gig of RAM. The pod is currently using 3 gig, everything is good, and the pod wants 5 gig. We know that this is not possible from the node. We know that it's not possible. It can set that to fail. Since we use the max of resources and resources allocated, the scheduler is not assigning any new pods because the desired is 5 gig there, so it's blocking off that capacity. Now, if the VPA would know that, okay, this is not possible, and the policy allows me to reschedule to a different node which has that capacity, and the pod can come up on a new node, then that 1 gig can get freed up immediately. The whole thing can get freed up immediately for new pods. Otherwise, it'll have to wait for a certain duration, 30 seconds or whatever it is, and for that duration, that 1 gig is blocked away. And then the VPA decides, okay, this is not happening within the duration that I expected, so then I'm going to reschedule it. So now you add this up cumulatively across the cluster, you would potentially end up, blocking away and wasting resources. So this condition seems to be in no way against any API design constraints design principles that I've read of so far, and it's reconstructible. It's just helpful information for the initiating actor to take action and make better cluster resource utilization.
Yep, I think I gave my feedback as well. I don't necessarily think that it's as bad as you're making it out to be for pods not to be scheduled onto resources that have been requested by the VPA. Presumably the VPA is sizing the resource requirements based on the actual usage of the pod. And if it really is the case that that particular pod requires extra resources, even if we can't officially grant it to them, blocking off some portion of resources for a period of time, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. And I think that sounds like the correct behavior to me. My point that I just made was more about if this is entirely reconstructible from the resources that have been allocated, the resources that have been requested, and the pods currently assigned to the node, then the only issue I see is that we now have a condition that we have to keep in sync with all the other declarations. And so if possible, I would rather have the initiating actor do that computation itself rather than store sort of this pre-computed value along with the pod. Does that make sense?
It's a pod status. It's not in the pod, by the way. It's an observation.
Yes. And yeah, I'll have to think about that.
Yeah, let's give it a little bit more thought before completely rejecting it. I just see that if we do it, then, and this is again one of the things we can always add on. It's not like a deal breaker.
Yeah.
But since I see that there is potential for, this is one single pod example that I took. Now, if multiple resizes were going on and each little pod blocks off a little capacity, and then VPA is holding on to that, essentially holding on to that for a duration of time. You pick a number like 30 seconds or 1 minute that it generally expects for things to sync. I don't know where to pull a number from the air. For that duration, we'll be underutilizing the cluster. So that's one of the reasons I felt this condition. I see there is a benefit to doing this. I don't see any detriment. So I've been in favor of keeping it. So let's give it a little bit more thought.
What did you think about the idea of having a node condition rather than a pod condition?
That could help. So if, yes, that could certainly help. If the node says I'm oversubscribed because of the resources, then the initiating actor can choose to evict multiple pods that it owns. Yeah, we could go down that route as well. Let me give it a little bit more thought on that. Is that something that I haven't thought of the corner cases in that one, so I'll give it more thought, but does that sound like a good idea to everyone?
Can I ask you some question? I try to not add more complexity to this one, but since David mentioned this node condition, so earlier you described the use cases, and also previous meeting we described the cases. It's a lot of time we add that complexity. To me, it is just because scheduler made a decision, or whatever controller made this decision for this VPA, and they don't know the condition, right? They don't know. Basically, they really don't know it is the current node, and they don't know the limits and what it is maximum limits assigned, and they also don't know the usage. So you end up to like the only based on because the scheduler only knows the request, and based on the request to make the decision. So you end up to have to allocate that pod or container on the node, but then you couldn't fulfill your desired state for that pod. Do we think about there's potential have the more problem, like you may end up to like the one pod or my container will be like cascading, like the keep sent to the node and didn't fulfill that desire, and then reschedule to another node and fulfill. If we think about, we could change that if we teach scheduler more intelligence, and need scheduler know some usage the scheduler node, we could define some rules for scheduler, like the not just request, simply place those things there, and we could have the node to export, estimate some, predict some usage based on the current assigned to the node, and then they based on that one make the more smarter decision and can prevent such problem.
I believe the scheduler already knows. It caches the nodes, and it knows the node's capacity. The node informer, I believe, gives it that information. And then when every pod comes in, as it assigns the pods to a node, it caches the pods that are assigned to a node, and then it sums them up. In the case of resize, the scheduler in the current proposed design, we're saying, okay, the pod that is taking X wants X plus Y. So the scheduler is going to say, okay, I see that the pod wants X plus Y, and I believe that kubelet is working towards it. So I'm not going to take away from that Y. That's the current proposal.
Scheduler do know the only request, and they also know the node capacity and the node allocatable, and which is could assign. So they do sum up those requests, say, oh, and also in the VPA, then you have to say, oh, additional request. But the problem is when you're on a node, and you could using way more than your request. So scheduler have no idea about that one. So you end up could be have like the real behavior of the node on a one single node, which have the where behavior, they have the guarantee jobs there, and they didn't using much resources. Scheduler have no idea about those things. And then, but another node, everyone just ask minimal, but every single thing is burstable or best effort, and the scheduler keep push slash that node with the new request. And end up like no request can be really satisfied on that node. And existing running pod could be performance, could be bad because they're compete off the compute resource on the node. So I just brought it up because I remember recently also have people want to change Kubernetes, introduce, I forgot the detail, want to add some really complicated logical, try to bypass the scheduler. And I also suggest, can we just start, if I just ask if the scheduler knows the usage, could the scheduler do better job? So they did agree. So I would just think about in your cases also, if you could have something, this is just based on the Davis proposal node condition. Because node condition could tell you more. Like okay, in the real world, what's my node current real condition? I would just kind of beyond that ask even like the more, like the real usage.
I think I know what you're saying. However, I don't know if it's pertinent to the resizing cap. This may be a separate cap where where we want the scheduler to make smarter decisions on scheduling new pods. Once pods are scheduled and they want to be resized in place, that information doesn't have any bearing. Even if the scheduler knows that the current usage is reaching threshold, the scheduler, at least in our current proposal, we're saying scheduler is just an observer. We don't want it involved in the resize. Once a pod is bound, scheduler is out. The only place where we considered it was when preemption, if we could do preemption, and that's something we are planning to do in the kubelet right now. It could be, we're not even planning to do it in phase one. We do it without preemption first, and then we see how it works, and then we see if we want to do preemption from kubelet. As long as it can happen at the same parity as scheduler, which has a global view, then it's fine in my mind.
So
yeah, your point is a very valid one. It's just something that I don't know if it applies to resize, the in-place resize cap.
I don't push it to we have to do that as well, but I disagree a couple of things. And one thing it is I did agree before to let Kubernetes do the preemption for the initial. The reason it is because in the current situation and the scheduler cannot, because they don't aware of the node real condition. So for me, Kubernetes, no matter what, Kubernetes have to do that. It's just self-defense because I don't want to lose the entire node. So Kubernetes have to do. If some upstream layer don't do their work, and the Kubernetes, it is the last line of the control plane, last line of the scheduling. So they have to do part of the work. But I disagree that is the same effect. Because Kubernetes don't have the global knowledge. Scheduler do, controller do.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Kubernetes could end up one node. You could have end up the one pod, one container, one really critical services. Because these kind of things, you basically keep kill in the many, many nodes. Never really run. It is real problem in production. Because we have no idea about okay, how critical this node. We basically just treat this pod. Only simply information we have, it is the priority cost. But that it itself is the two core screen. It's not to give you all the detail. So you could end up among all those critical and jobs, and this ones keep being killed, and then schedule another node and killed. And think about that round trip and multiple round trip as together. That's really, really problem for customer. Another thing is, I do agree this is a separate issue, but I do see because the scheduler make of the usage, make of the real situation, and we end up at many extra complexity to many design. Then VPA, it is one of the design here, because a lot of I've been observed the last when discussed, because I didn't read the latest of the PR. The last time I read the PR, it is the before they hand over to you. So I can see that many, many use cases came from because we are lack of the information. So we want to capture some information and to checkpoint some information and take the reaction mode. So that's kind of my observation, but anyway, it's just my observation.
The scheduler, the kubelet or scheduler, when they evict VPA, as far as I know, if it were to evict a service that's critical, it will make sure I believe they all use the eviction API, and that will either succeed, in which case it will delete the pod, or it will fail because of XYZ reason, and one of the reasons is like pod disruption budget isn't there. So that ensures that a minimum available set of services is running. The proposal was for the kubelet to use the same eviction API. So it should protect from any critical services from being evicted with like the carpet being pulled under the service. I experimented with that, and it seems to work. There was one outstanding question on how scheduler does. I'll ping Bobby and see what he thinks. I know David has pinged him.
Yeah, I think my question was about whether the grace periods are reflected or respected. But it sounds like pod disruption budgets are also respected as part of this. My basic question was whether the eviction API actually gives us a time bound by which a pod would be removed. Just because in past discussions with Derek and Don at SIG Node, we said that one useful way to think about this feature would be as being able to provide access to compute resources within some period of time. So I was mostly trying to figure out if that was something we could meet with the eviction API, or whether we couldn't provide that guarantee.
So this is my observation is half-baked in the sense from when I experimented with it.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that when pod disruption budget is available, it immediately evicts. The grace period is not. It's as if you called a pod delete. That kind of suggests that we have to put that grace period hold off before you call evict in there. So that is a bit of complexity that would be added. I haven't looked into the scheduler code to see if scheduler does it explicitly, but my observation was eviction API did not really keep the pod running for like 30 seconds or whatever the grace period was. It just called delete if the PDB was available. If it was not available, then it fails your request.
Yep. And I've actually remembered what my concerns were. So I'll try and put them a little bit more eloquently. My main concern was the pod condition, because it is a sort of aggregation of other state, and the key or one piece of that state is actually node state. And my concern was mostly about consistency between, say, the pods assigned to the node and this condition. So I know that currently it sounds like the proposed flow is mostly linear in terms of your pod gets scheduled, it sets the failed node or failed capacity condition, right? And then the only step after that would be it gets removed from the node. But if, for example, we ever wanted to do something where it could get scheduled and then VPA could decide to abandon the resource update or something like that and leave it as is, I would be concerned about the condition becoming out of date, or like it starts to look more like a state machine because it can go in many different directions, if that makes sense.
It would not become stale because let's say we, in the previous example, your node capacity has 4 gig and the pod is 3 gig, and they request 5 gig. It's not, you cannot satisfy it. The pod condition goes to failed, and then VPA says, okay, I'll remember what the previous value was. I am requesting 5 gig. Oh, I see that it's failed node capacity. So my choices are reschedule the pod or abandon. If I were to abandon, then I'm just going to put that back to 3 gig, the desired state. And in that case, as soon as we see that, we compute the pod. Request, and then.
Right. No, I understand it, but it relies on the kubelet to update that as soon as that happens. In other words, like there's some actual state, which is the pod requests and the node allocatable, which is used to compute all of this. And this is going to always lag behind that. And so I preferred, one of the reasons why I thought moving to a node condition would be more helpful is because what we're actually trying to get at is describing the state of the node at any point in time, not necessarily the state of the pod. The state of the pod, the important thing we care about is, has it been reconciled to its desired state? But the main other piece that we care about isn't sort of, has the node been rejected or not, right? It's actually a question of, is the node oversubscribed? And we would end up trying to keep that particular property in sync with whatever the node's current assigned pods were.
Yeah, I believe node condition will work. The only thing I can think of is if VPA just had node condition to work with and it had requested multiple pods, maybe it can compute which pods it can choose to evict. If the granularity is much finer if the pod conditions were known, where it is exceeding or which one is in progress. If we did not have that information, then let's say there are 2 pods. One of them, the pod is being resized, the next update comes in, and then it cannot meet the node capacity is reached. Now, both update requests came in at the same time at T0. So there is 30-second window during which it's going to wait and see if the pods are being resized. The first one we are resizing, we're working towards it. We can do it, we're resizing it. The second one we cannot because capacity has reached. Now VPA does not know, it sees that node condition is set, okay, the capacity is, it's oversubscribed. But VPA cannot tell which of the pods is causing that. Or which is being resized. It might evict the pod that's being resized. So that is the only concern I see with not having pod level granularity on this, and with just node level granularity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. You had proposed doing the resources allocate. Okay. Dawn says timeout.
Sorry, I think that we already ran for the 25 minutes on this topic. Maybe we can move those discussing offline. It's really, really good discussing. And can we continue through the PR? And so because we have so many topics today, and so we have to move faster, and otherwise we cannot cover everything there. So next one, can we talk? Let's move to the topology manager updates and review. And I think this is proposed by.
Yeah, it's me, Louise, if you can hear me.
So Louise, please. Okay.
Thanks. So basically what I wanted to do was just there's 6 PRs still open for Topology Manager that we'd like to get reviewed and merged for code freeze for 1.16. A lot of them have had a fair few review cycles. Some of them are just waiting on an approve on them. I can link the 6 that are remaining, and they do depend on each other. So they do need to be merged in an order. So I can also link that. So I'd like to get just eyes on them and start getting them approved and merged. 4 of them have already been merged. So it's just a matter of getting the rest of them in. So that's kind of what I wanted to bring up.
Thanks. I remember at the earlier stage, we did assign the approver and the reviewer. So can you refresh my memory? Who is assigned the reviewer? I think it's Connor and
I think Connor and Derek have approver rights.
Sure, and Seth is the one of the reviewer, right? And so okay, we are going to follow up those things.
Perfect. Yeah, and just I think Kevin's follow up. The next item is based on Topology Manager. So some of the PRs may need tweaks based on what we decide after the discussion with Kevin's proposals. But I would like to keep a lot of them. I think a lot of them have the base code there, and if we could merge them mostly as they are, and then make changes based on what Kevin proposes and what we decide, that would be great. I just don't want to leave them hanging open for much longer if possible.
Sure, thanks. Unfortunately, Derek couldn't attend today's meeting, and so definitely because you already bring our attention, so I will sync up with Derek after this meeting and see what's the next step. And if required, maybe can you come back next week?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. I'll link in the agenda the order of the PRs that need to be merged and which ones are left.
Sure.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I believe this is cover all those topology management related proposal and the PRs.
Yeah, exactly. So, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead, Louise. I thought she was moving on to the next item. I misheard.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm done, Kevin. You can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so the next item on the agenda here was just about some updates to the current implementation that's in those PRs that Louise was just talking about. I definitely agree with her that they're in a state that's good enough that if we can get a last set of eyes on it for review, we could merge them mostly in the state that they're in right now. And then, you know, in the background, we could talk about some of the proposals I have in these documents here and merge those changes on top of it. It'd be a much easier flow than trying to, you know, take what I'm proposing here and modifying it. It's probably not worth right now with, you know, the limited time we have left in the call to actually go through all of the different points that I have in these proposals, but we've been talking about them offline. The first link that I have there is a document that outlines in detail some of the tweaks that I'd like to see made to the topology manager, at least, you know, some short-term, some long-term. And I've been talking with Louise and others at Intel and others at different places about this. Because at least internally at NVIDIA, we would need these changes to be made for us to actually have the topology manager would be something useful for us. And that's kind of the motivation behind these different proposals that I'm adding here. So I think that's kind of it on the topology manager. If we have extra time, I think we can probably come back to it and talk through some of the details, but I don't want to use up too much of this call to go into the details of that. If people could just review these documents and look through the enhancement PRs I have there, I think that's the best first step. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. So Kevin, do you also want to talk about more about the init container in the CPU manager?
Yeah, so that was more just a ping. So I was on this call 3 weeks ago to propose this PR, and it was assigned to Seth, but it hasn't been looked at since then. So it was more of just a ping to have someone jump in and look at it.
Okay.
That's fine,
Unfortunately,
I'll
I
be
think
quick.
most of the folks. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is Seth, and yes, this is falling off my radar. I apologize. I'll take a look.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, let's move to last agenda for today. I think Martin, I saw you. Are you on the call? Yes.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I'm here. This is again a ping for like a PR which I opened, and I was here like also a weeks ago. So I'm just waiting for like a quick review. Hopefully the changes. It's in my honest opinion, I still believe it's a bug. It might be a feature. I don't know. So it's up to you. But hopefully, if you can get some reviewers on it, it will be really great.
Yeah, I will take a look on this one. And Tim or Claire, can you also take a look on this one too? Because from the security perspective. Yeah.
Sure.
So Tim and myself will take a look at this one. Yeah. So I will assign to me and him. Yeah. Okay, that's all for today. So I think we can come back to the VPA to talk about. No, I think is there any other topic people want to board up?
It looks like there's a comment in the chat.
Oh. Glenn?
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. I was just wondering whether we could schedule some time, maybe put it on the agenda for next week to talk about the decryption, image decryption KEP. We've got some comments on it as well, but I think you know, it would be good to also share a little bit more details on that.
Yes, I did. So do we have the trouble to add people have the trouble access this SIG Node meeting notes? I thought everyone could just join and signal the group, and also then once you join SIG Node group, you could you have the permission edit. So do we have the trouble?
I think no one has defined that you should join the group in the doc, so we should probably add that.
Okay. So I already added your request to the agenda.
All right, thanks. And then I'll try and join the group and see if that works as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So that looks like that's it for today. Thank you everyone joining today's meeting, and see you guys next week. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.